Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm your host, Ian Fisher, here today. We've got a great show lined up for you, and our focus today is going to be on special scholarships and programs for students. And I think what we have discovered as we have conversations with families year over year is that there are so many different ways that campuses, colleges reach out to families, that they try and make it a little bit easier for folks to understand this process, to be connected with institutions that are going to be a fit for them, and help to facilitate a really strong match. And in order to unpack a couple of really interesting programs that are available to some students, I wanted to bring a couple of my colleagues on the show today. First of all, joining us from Tornado Alley, somewhere in the Midwest, is Blair Dixon. Blair, welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. And Ian, thanks for having me today. Yeah, if you
Glad
all
to
are
have you.
listening, you might hear some thunder on my end. Everything is okay over here.
Nothing to be concerned about. It's all going to be fine. And then coming in from beautiful, sunny, always perfect Southern California, right? We have Geraldine
Right.
Castaneda. Geraldine, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy, thrilled to be here, and it's maybe 85 degrees today.
Okay,
Incredible.
great. All right. Well, we don't want to hear any more from you on that. So, what we're going to talk about today are particularly two special programs. I would call them what recruitment programs, scholarship programs. How would we define them in terms of the adjective? Geraldine, you're nodding.
Yeah, well, I think they're all of those things. So they're recruitment programs specifically for first generation to college or low income students. They're application platforms, um, and and specifically for Questbridge, they're also like junior recruitment programs, which we can get into in a second.
So, Questbridge is one of those. And Geraldine, you yourself were a Questbridge scholar who also worked within the Pomona College admission office with Questbridge scholars as a professional admission officer. And then Blair, as you said it before we started, you were a member of the Posse.
Yes, so I was a Posse scholar, currently a Posse alumni, and I was selected for the first Posse to come from Houston to go to Colby College over in Waterville, Maine. So there had been 12 Posses from New York City prior to mine. Switched things up and started recruiting out of Houston. So to your point, Ian, it is definitely a recruitment tool. I imagine there was some sort of institutional priority to increase the geographic diversity to Colby from the South, warranting that decision.
And I want to start from the institutional perspective. We're all former college admission officers. And so we've been in a position where the big goal is you want to enroll a class and you have some objectives around that class. And recruitment is a huge part of it. Before you can admit students, you have to get those students to apply. And can we just talk a little bit about why these programs are so helpful, especially for the kinds of small colleges that the three of us attended that don't necessarily have the same kind of national name recognition as your Ivy schools or your Research One universities? You've got a Colby, you've got a Pomona, you've got a Reed College. What is the role that Questbridge and Posse and similar programs will play for those institutions? Geraldine?
Yeah, it's mainly, I would say it serves as two things. These applications and the programs serve as feeders to these institutions, right? They connect first generation low income students that are high achieving, that are doing well in their classes, that are eager for that, stimulating 4-year college experience to schools that they might have not heard of yet, right? That are not maybe the big, large publics in their state, that don't have the big Ivy name attached to it, but that can commit to providing resources, support, and really funding to these students' 4-year educations. And then on the reverse, it serves as exposure to students, right? So as a Posse scholar, as a Questbridge scholar, you then are exposed via these programs to those institutions, and again, mostly to the resources that they offer. So first gen clubs on those campuses, the financial aid awards that these campuses can offer, fly-in programs, right? And they provide, I think, a more holistic view of what these campuses can or how these campuses can support those students. So it goes both ways. It's exposure and it's kind of a feeding system. And I think that it's mutually beneficial.
So
Mhm.
Blair, you said you grew up in Houston.
I did. Yes,
And
outside of
when
Houston.
you were growing up in Houston and going through your high school career, before you had the opportunity to engage with Posse, what was your awareness of small liberal arts colleges in general, Colby College in particular? Like,
Yeah.
what did you think about from a college
Mhm.
perspective?
Yeah, definitely. So, personally speaking, I grew up in a family where, college was the expected next steps. Like, I am
Hmm.
not first generation. Both of my parents went to college themselves. So, I had a lived experience where college was a part of the conversation from a pretty early age. And actually, before I connected with the Posse Foundation and started going through that process, I was targeting another liberal arts smaller school, but quite different from Colby College. I was spellbound, as they say, because I was planning on attending Spelman College in Atlanta, which for our listeners, it is a small liberal arts all women's college and also an HBCU. So, I was going to be surrounded by folks who shared a lot of my lived experiences growing up. But the first time I heard the name Colby College was when I started the Posse process. So, to Geraldine's point, it serves as massive exposure. And each, a little bit about the Posse Foundation, each partner city, there are currently 10, Houston is one of them. They partner with a handful of colleges and universities, tends to be a little bit more elite selective institutions, and sends groups of 10 students to each of these campuses around the country. And they tend to be schools that are farther from home, that are less recognizable to our region. So Colby was definitely one of those. We had Carleton College, another small liberal arts isolated institution, Bryn Mawr in Philly, but also strangely Texas A&M, UT, and UVA. So the
Hmm.
Houston site was a little bit mixed in that way. But yeah, I would have absolutely never considered going to college in rural Maine, probably not even New England or the Northeast, if it wasn't for the Posse Scholarship. I do want to point out a quick difference between the Posse Scholarship and the Questbridge Scholarship. So whereas the Questbridge Scholarship is geared towards low income, first generations, typically students of color, the Posse Scholarship is a leadership scholarship, straight up. The only prerequisites to be eligible for the scholarship is that you have to attend a public school. And so for that reason, a lot of the applicants and folks selected do tend to be students of color. But the goal of the Posse Foundation is to identify talented young people with tremendous leadership potential, defined in a lot of different ways, training them, and sending groups of 10 folks to these colleges far from home with the purpose of supporting each other, and ensuring that you all persist and graduate together as a posse.
So you're saying, Blair, the goal is 10 students enroll
Mm-hmm.
at the institutions, at
Yeah,
each institution. And
correct.
I think for some listeners, that might seem like, what, 10? That's not a whole lot. But when you're talking about a community that has 1,200, 1,500, 2,000 students in total, 10 is a pretty substantial number and is a nice small community of folks who can rely on one another, depend on one another as they move through that community together. And so there's a
Exactly.
lot of meaning, a lot of connection, I think, that gets created in being a part of that group together.
Right.
Um, what is your sort of, do you have, you mentioned you were a Posse alumna, like that is part of, how you think of yourself. Do you still
Yeah.
remain in touch with the folks who are in your Posse going into Colby?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think, if you ask, posse to posse, like how close were you on campus? How do you stay in touch post graduation? The answers will vary significantly. I think my posse was in a special circumstance because we were the first posse to come from Houston. And, Colby does not have a large, Southern contingency.
Hmm.
So, we really were latching on to each other for a sense of normalcy, for a sense of home. And so, we were even like nicknamed like the clingy posse because we were just like, we need to stick together. But we did persist and graduate all together as a posse, which
Love
is
it.
the goal of the
Yeah.
entire organization. So yes, we're still very much in touch. Those are going to be some of the most important people in my life forever. And yeah, it's just, it creates this sense of like my success, is also my family's success. Posse uses a lot of familial terms. So like the posse in the class above yours are like your parents, you have your grandparents and your great grandparents. So, I think that just goes to show like how important it is and how personal it is for us, and our success is the group's success. And I always use the phrase positive peer pressure. That might be like a little bit of like a polarizing term. But when you have nine other people like, counting on you to persist and graduate, you think twice about stopping out, about, not finishing your degree. So it works, and the numbers do not lie as well.
Geraldine, Questbridge, does it have that same kind of sense of community? Do you feel that same core identity with other Questbridge scholars? What are the sort of features of that program that allow students to feel connected to their community as they move through their school?
Yeah, it's definitely different in that there isn't a sense of that smaller, tight-knit community in the way that it's built out
Mm,
for Posse, right? For Posse, you're coming in as a posse of people, right? A group of
right.
10. For Questbridge, it serves more as, again, a funnel and an application platform. So students that are applying to Questbridge are mandatorily first-gen students, so first in their family to go to college, are low income. And through the Questbridge application, which is an early application, it is early decision. Students are submitting their initial, essays, transcripts, et cetera, around August, September of their senior year. Once they apply to Questbridge, then you are selected either to be a Questbridge match finalist or to simply apply through the Questbridge application. If you are selected to move forward in the process as a Questbridge match finalist, that means that then you have the option to apply to Questbridge partner schools. I think currently there are about
Mm,
55 of them, which are many small schools, definitely some smaller privates, lots of liberal arts colleges, many of the Ivies as well. And those 55 partner schools then receive the applications from the Questbridge match finalists. So for example, I was applying senior year, right? I applied to be a Questbridge match finalist, and they said, yes, you're good to go. I applied. You can then rank certain schools. So students can rank anywhere from, I want to say 5, 10, 12 schools, I think is the max now. And your application gets sent to all of those institutions. Again, it's an early process at this point, it's maybe October. Once you apply to those partner schools, those institutions get your application and they rank you as an applicant. They say, we would love, these of the 500 Questbridge apps that we got, these are our top 100 or our top 300 or whatever. And the institution goes back and forth with Questbridge a few times to compare the institution's rankings and the students' application rankings, how they ranked their schools. And at the end of that process, a school like Pomona might say, we have space for about 20 Questbridge students. A school like Caltech might say, we have space for 50 Questbridge spots, right? And so the schools will vary, again, based on their priorities for that
mhm.
specific year, for their enrollment numbers. And then if you are matched with that institution, then that Questbridge finalist student receives a full ride to that college, which again is it's a life-changing opportunity, right? For many of the
Yeah.
students who otherwise might have not even heard of the school, wouldn't applied to that school otherwise, are receiving 100% of college expenses funded. So that's tuition, that's room and board, that's, student fees, everything is covered by the Questbridge scholarship. And so what that means is that the number of students coming in varies school by school. At Pomona, it was the case we had about 15 15 or 20 of us coming in. That number has changed year and year. But there is, for most of these institutions, a Questbridge club, right? Or like a first gen low income club. And those run very similarly to what Blair was saying, right? Where you have a group of folks kind of leaning on you and there to support you through the graduation process, through the social aspects of college, through the transition there. And I'll say it's not as tight knit as Posse is, but it is a material support that is incredibly beneficial for these students.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's first of all just so striking what the value is to the students in this situation. It sounds like there's a lot of care that is also taken with respect to this matching process, that it's not just sort of like you get stuck at this place, you've committed to it, that school gets you and you're off to go, but they really want to make sure that this match gives the student the opportunity to be successful long term, right? The goal is not just let's get some students into our campus community. It's let's make sure that these students are able to persist and thrive and be successful over 4 years, which is, I think, why you've got so many on-campus programs that continue to support the integration of students and the students becoming, strong members of the community as well. What would be your recommendation for students who are excited by these kinds of opportunities, who are thinking, I would like to know whether this is something that is applicable for me or a fit for me? Where should students go to find information and to explore the possibility? What I'm hearing from both of you is that it starts kind of early, that it is something that people need to be on top of early on in the process, perhaps earlier than a traditional senior would be looking at this kind of stuff. Blair, what's your sense of timing for folks and resources they can use?
It's about now. So as a
Okay,
Posse
great.
alum, I receive 2 nominations a year. So the Posse scholarship is nomination based. So we'll want to tap into your community resources. If you belong to any community-based organizations, talk to your school counselor, connect with a Posse alum. Pro tip, most Posse alums are not nominating, especially the further they get from their own graduation. Those nominations are just lapsing. So if you reach out on LinkedIn to a Posse alum and you're like, you don't know me, can you nominate me for the Posse scholarship? They'll probably say yes. So if you're interested, there are a couple of different ways to be nominated, and it is time. So my nominations are due at the end of July. So if you are interested in that, robust, holistic support, in a elite college space, you'll want to start looking into that now.
And for Blair, for her nominations, she just holds like a Survivor style competition where whoever
Actually,
outwits, outplays, and outlasts.
right. No, it's actually a talent show. You have to
Oh, okay,
do a little
that's
song
cool.
and dance, and yeah.
3 phases, 3 different talents.
Right.
Yeah, perfect. Geraldine, what
For
about for Questbridge?
Yeah, for Questbridge, it depends. If you're wanting to come in, they have a junior program as well. So for students that are interested in that, like, exploring colleges, seeing which one would be your best fit, they have a junior program called the College Prep Scholar Program, CPS. And for that, you would apply around summer before junior year. If you are currently a junior year has passed, you're right before senior year, now would be the time to begin looking through the Questbridge senior application. So the college match application. They have an incredible website and they have a really if you email them, they're back to you in 24 hours. So they're really helpful, really available, and now would be the time to begin looking through that application.
Questbridge, Posse, great programs. Anything else you want to shout out? I know we're so lucky to have both of you, and you've had these experiences in your own educational pathway. But are there others that you would just shout out for people to look into if they're interested in this type of scholarship opportunity?
Yeah, this isn't as much a pathway or an application, but the Jack Kent Cook Scholarship is also very robust and open for students of all backgrounds, but especially for Shen and low income students as well.
Yeah.
Great. And I would shout out College Horizons as an option for Indigenous students to take a look at. That's a really, really great program. Blair, what about you?
I was just gonna say, what's the status on Gates Millennium? Is that has
I don't know.
historically been a great access
Great scholarship.
point for first-gen low-income students. I think there's some conversation about that evolving in the coming years, so stay tuned to that. But I think for like rising seniors, that probably is still very much in play. So take a look.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you both for coming on the show and talking through your experiences. Love to hear it. And we'll be excited to have you back again another time.
Yeah, thanks for having
Thanks for
us.
having us.
Of course.
Bye-bye.
When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the specific scholarships that individual institutions have to offer students that are typically application and interview based. So stick around. We'll go right through it. All right, everyone, welcome back to Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. We just had a great discussion of a couple of really specialized scholarship programs, the Questbridge Scholars Program, the Posse Scholars. We want to talk a little bit about some of the other scholarships that might be available as special features of different institutions, or there might be especially generous scholarships that are available to students all over the country. And in order to do that, I'm going to welcome my colleague, Christine Kenyon, who not only has worked previously in college admissions, but also has been a part of one of these special scholarship committees. Christine, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Ian. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So you worked at UNC as a part of scholarship program at UNC Chapel Hill. Can you tell us a
Yes.
little bit about the name of that scholarship and the structure of that scholarship as a way of introducing this concept to folks who might be unfamiliar?
Yeah, absolutely. So at UNC Chapel Hill, there is a full tuition scholarship called the Moorhead Cane, and they receive enough applications and interest that they have their own office, their own admissions process for scholarship consideration. And I was an application reviewer and interviewer for them for a couple of years, and it was really interesting just to see the nuance and the nuance of reviewing an applicant for a scholarship that was highly selective and very comprehensive, in addition to the already complicated and challenging part of, getting into UNC Chapel Hill as an undergrad.
Yeah. So you've got the admission process for a really selective school like UNC. University of Virginia has one of these. Also, the Jefferson Scholars Program is one that I think a lot of people are aware of. What has been, or having been somebody who's read an admissions application and has gone through the scholarship process, what would you say is the biggest difference that students might expect from the scholarship application process as compared with the college admission process?
Yeah, so I think in the scholarship process, it's really specific to the core tenets or the mission statement of that specific scholarship. So every scholarship program, if it has a programmatic element, which the Moorhead Cane does, the Jefferson Scholarship does, the Presidential Scholarship at Boston College. It's not just free money where the college says, you're super smart and we're giving you a full tuition scholarship to go here and study here. You are brought in, you being the student is brought in as part of a cohort of scholars, and together they might take specific classes with each other. They might have a little bit more advising or mentorship from faculty and staff on campus. Usually there's some sort of a summer stipend for the student to explore anything they want academically or professionally. And usually there's some sort of final culmination in the senior year, whether it's a thesis, a paper presentation, a poster presentation, something that the scholars work on and present to their cohort and the other members of the scholarship organization to show their growth from when they started to when they finish. So because of this programmatic element, the scholarship application process, while it will feel very similar to the admissions process in terms of what's your name, where do you go to high school, tell us about your interest in this, write these essay responses. All of the essays, all of the written components, and certainly the interview components of the scholarship review process really focus on that mission that is at the core of whatever that scholarship program is. So being really thoughtful about what you reflect upon in your writing, what you talk about in your interviews, to make sure that you are sharing as many different facets of your experience to show why you're a good fit for this particular program, and vice versa, is crucial in the scholarship consideration process.
Is that something that's typically a part of, let's say, the application packet where they give you that information, or do you need to go out and dig? And if you do, what resources should you be using to conduct your research for your responses to these application questions?
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to supplemental essay questions
Hmm.
as part of the typical admissions process. There is a reason why a school would have this additional work they want the student to put into the application process, and there's thought behind the questions that are asked, and what they're hoping to learn. So many of these scholarship organizations will absolutely publish what their essay questions are going to be. They have comprehensive websites that talk about the core of the program, how it was founded, what some previous alumni of the scholarship program have accomplished. And so for the applicants, it's almost as if you're doing a parallel admission process at the same time. So you're
Hmm.
going through, and with this example of UNC, you're applying to UNC Chapel Hill, you're filling out the Common App or whatever application platform works for you. You're going through their supplemental essays, and also you're doing the exact same thing for almost like a mini college experience within UNC.
Hmm. Do you, if you're going through that process for Moorhead Kane, for example, you don't already know that you've been admitted to UNC, and does it give you any hints about whether you might be a likely candidate? Is there anything you can glean from that?
It's a really good question. And this is very specific to each individual college and university. And this could have changed since I worked there. But when I was there, the Moorhead Kane application deadline was October 1. And that was before the earliest deadline for just general UNC undergrad admissions, early deadline of October 15th. And
Hmm.
so we would be reviewing candidates and getting to know them and making decisions without having any understanding of what their undergrad admissions file looked like.
Hmm.
Um, so, at some point in the academic year, in the application process, the undergrad admissions office and the scholarship admissions office will connect, and they'll kind of like compare and contrast and say, hey, this is a student we're really interested in. And the admissions office will say, great, us too, they're on track to be admitted. Or, bummer, they fall short of what we're looking at for X, Y, or Z criteria this year in terms of undergrad admissions. Agree with you that they're very compelling, but we don't recommend you move forward with them in the scholarship
Wow.
process because we think they might be deferred, or we're not sure if they'll be admitted. And so
Wow.
again, this differs at many different colleges. When I was at Babson College and reviewing scholarships for the Weissman Scholarship, which is Babson's full tuition programmatic scholarship, we would have reviewed the student's admissions file in its entirety first and confirmed and known that they were on track to be admitted before we even looked at the Weissman
Gotcha.
Scholarship application, in part because the timing of the scholarship deadline wasn't, it allowed us to do that. So it does vary slightly depending on the university and the program.
It's interesting. And I think it would feel, I mean, it doesn't feel intuitive, right? That you could have these two different programs that might be interpreting an application differently. But I imagine that for the most part, there is alignment in these spaces, and that, students who are competitive for the scholarship are also students who are competitive for admission.
9 times
What
out of
about
10, yes.
nine? Yeah, so it would be uncommon, I think, that you would see otherwise. What about the role of an interview process in these scholarships? I mean, sometimes they are more intensive than a traditional college admissions
Mhm.
interview, which is usually just a conversation with an alumnus or maybe a staff member of that institution. Can you talk a little bit about the role that interviewing plays here, and where it pops up in the timeline as well?
Yeah. So there will be some sort of interview component for any of these full tuition scholarship programs. Because again, the universities are investing a lot of financial investment into these students. They think that these students are going to be movers and shakers and thinkers and community builders on their college campus, and they really want to make sure they're picking the right kids, right? So the interview is just another added opportunity for the student to talk about their fit for the program and for the university scholarship program to learn more about what that student's interest is, how independent of a thinker they are, how collaborative they are, what they might do with the summer program money. And the world is your oyster. And so they want to make sure that the students they are presenting with this almost blank check. It's not a blank check, right? But like this,
Right,
where it's like,
right.
you're coming in and we are paying for everything. And over the summer, we're also going to pay for you to do whatever you want. That's super interesting. So go change the world. That's kind of a lot, right? So the universities have these interviews to better understand what the student envisions for their summers, what their ideal goal would be over their 4 years at the university in terms of what they want to accomplish. So the interviews can be virtual with a live human. They can be digital, where you're timed and you have like 60 seconds to record a response to an unknown question that flashes up on the screen before you.
Yeah.
None of these are these aren't ways that the admissions officers are trying to weed students out. It's more that they're just trying to see how students react to different environments, different questions. How do you react when you're uncomfortable? This is why, like, classic consulting interviews, they ask you ridiculous questions. Like, if you had an airplane and I had, ping pongs and I needed to fill the airplane with ping pongs, what would it be?
Right.
I've never seen that asked in a scholarship interview, but I give it as an example because the answer isn't what the interviewer is looking to learn. There's no right answer. They're looking to understand, how do you process information? How do you get to a conclusion? What is your thought process? How do you react under pressure? And they will absolutely ask about things that are core to the program, whether it's collaboration, whether it's research and independent study, whether it's leadership. That each scholarship has a very specific focus, and you want to pay very close attention to what that focus is so that you can talk about your experiences in those areas in these interview processes to show why you'd be a good fit for the scholarship.
You can see with these scholarships, the benefit to the institution is that they draw in some really talented students. And I think that sort of goes without saying. It comes at a cost to them, right? Because they have to pay, or at least they don't get the benefit of the tuition from this student. But I think it's worthwhile. You can also see in some ways the benefit to the student, because of course they get this great full ride, and they get a full ride to a great institution. But there's also a lot of responsibility that I'm hearing is being placed on the student. These are programmatic scholarships. You have to have a plan. You have to be able to be responsive to these questions. I can imagine a lot of parents listening be like, of course I want my kid to get that scholarship. But I could also imagine a lot of students hearing this and be like, man, that seems like a lot of work. I don't know if that's quite right for me. I don't know if I can do a senior project. I don't know how do you encourage students to think about, this idea of lots of planning coming into this? Is it just a yes or no for everybody should say yes to something like this? Or do you have to be the right kind of student to want to go for it?
You absolutely have to be the right kind of student. So the students who end up getting these types of full programmatic scholarships are ones who are intellectually hungry. They're curious. They ask questions. They love learning. They're talented in multiple disciplines, whether it's academically, athletically, or extracurricularly in some other way. They're curious about the world. They learn from others. They ask probing questions. So these are students who aren't necessarily intimidated by these questions. They're excited by the opportunity to nerd out about whatever it is they're interested in and show the scholarship committee oh, this might be my place. These might be my people where I can finally go and like really dive deeply into my interest in X, Y, or Z with the support of faculty and staff that are going to help me to find different ways to bring my passion to life.
Now, there are some of these scholarships that we already talked about that are named that we know of. There are some others that maybe we haven't talked about today that we might not know about intuitively. How can students find information about available scholarship programs like this one? Should they start by looking for scholarships, or should they start by looking for institutions that are a match to them and then following up with a separate question about a scholarship that might be available?
The latter, because so much
Okay.
about these types of scholarship is fit based. And so if you're just hunting around for full tuition scholarships and trying to, be the round peg fitting yourself into a square hole or whatever the phrase is, that's not going to work. So definitely let the fit-based college search process occur. And while you're learning about the schools, if you learn that there is one of these scholarships available, explore it, see what you can find.
That sounds great. I think it's great advice. I think it's really helpful to know that these things are out there. And that doesn't mean they're easy to get, but I think as students who are looking at different colleges and parents who are supporting students, keep an eye out for these kinds of opportunities because they are such a help to a college experience for both the student and the family as well. Any parting words of wisdom, CK, that you want to share?
There are an incredible amount of colleges and universities in the US that are generous with their merit-based aid that aren't connected to a programmatic scholarship program. And so I think this is where having a balanced college list is really important because it's like the reverse of your question. So if you're looking for a full tuition scholarship, start with fit, start with applying to more schools on, the probable section of your list, because you might be one of the lucky ones who just gets admitted to a school. Oh, and they say also, we're giving you a 75% tuition scholarship because we want to attract you to come here and to enroll here. So I don't want people to feel as though the only way to get the full monetary, full tuition scholarship is through one of these highly competitive specialized scholarship programs. It's the right fit for the right student, but also there are plenty of other ways that you can navigate finding merit to discount the cost of the college experience by having a balanced college list.
Great. I think that's excellent advice, and appreciate you coming on the show to talk about your experience and also to give this great advice for students. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Ian.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about what the heck is going on with student loans right now. So stick around if you want the latest update. We'll be right back. All right, everyone, welcome back to Getting In, College Coach Conversation. We've had a couple of segments where we've talked a little bit about scholarships, and those scholarships have been wonderful programs that offer full rides for students who are eligible or who are qualified or who are selected. But for a lot of students, scholarships are not the way or the only way that they're going to pay for higher education. They also need to be able to pay using some loans. Now, I don't know much about loans, and so we've got Michelle Clifton here, who's one of our education finance experts, and she's going to talk us through some of the details. Michelle, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Ian?
I am doing really well. Now, there's a lot that's going on in the federal government and a lot around higher education in the federal government. And most of the student loans that people get in order to pursue higher education come through FAFSA, federal loans, that sort of thing. Is that correct? Is just establishing
That is
that
correct.
premise? All right, great. So as we head into the coming year, I think one of the things that a lot of folks are going to wonder is student loan interest rates. What do those look like in the coming year? Are they fixed for the entire year? And do they affect only students that are coming in as new freshmen, or do they affect all students who are receiving loans for their higher education?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So with federal loans, they are set annually. So if you're in school for undergrad for 4 years, then you borrow each year will have its own fixed rate. So if you're a current borrower who took loans years ago, your loans are not changing because they're already fixed based on the year. They've been fixed for quite a long time now. So for this upcoming year, for undergrads, it's going to be fixed at 6.39%. For graduate students, 7.94%. And for Graduate Plus and Parent Plus borrowers for undergraduate students, those are 8.9.
Okay, so I'm hearing a bunch of numbers.
Yep.
Say them one more time, just so
So
folks.
6.39 is what like a typical undergraduate student filing the FAFSA, getting that small direct loan
That's the
in their
student.
name.
The
That's
student loan, right?
the
Okay.
student loan that'll be fixed at 6.39.
And how do these numbers compare with last year? I mean, there have been a lot of
Yeah.
conversations around interest rates from the Fed, et cetera. I imagine that affects what these borrowing rates look like. What is this in comparison to prior years?
They have been going up a bit each year to year in the past, I think the past 5 years, maybe less. But this year they actually did go down a little bit, but not very much. So last year, for example, it was 6.53 compared to 6.39 for the undergraduate students, and 8.08 and 9.08 compared to 7.94 and 8.
Okay.
Slightly lower,
So
but at
pretty
least they didn't go
small.
up.
Right, but you'll take it. You'll take any bit you can get, even if it's 100th
These days,
of a
yes.
percentage point with these loans. Now, we have talked previously about the SAVE plan, and there's a lawsuit that is kind of going on with respect to that SAVE plan. Can you just briefly remind our listeners what the SAVE plan is, and then talk a little bit about the current lawsuit, and what the status is of that?
Yeah. So the SAVE plan was an income-driven repayment plan that was introduced a couple years ago that really offered a lot more manageable payments for borrowers. So it was really exciting, but it's been dealing with lots of legal challenges, which has completely halted the program. So for the past, it's almost been a year now. It was last August. They paused anyone that was on the SAVE plan. They paused payments. They put them into an interest-free forbearance. There was also a period of time where borrowers could apply for the SAVE plan to go into the forbearance until a decision was made. And I had heard at one point like 8 million borrowers had applied for this plan.
Wow.
So we've been waiting to see what's going to happen with it. The assumption is that it was, all along we didn't think it was going to last. But a lot of borrowers are just waiting in limbo, not making progress towards paying off their loans, not making progress towards forgiveness. So we have seen some borrowers switch repayment plans instead of waiting. Some are waiting it out. But one update on that is that as of March 26th, borrowers cannot apply for this plan anymore. If they're applying for an income-driven plan, they have to apply for the others. And so there hasn't been any update on the actual lawsuit itself, but if you watched anything on the news, you've probably heard about the reconciliation bill, which is being called the One Big Beautiful Bill. And included in that is how they are likely going to get rid of the SAVE plan. So obviously this is still pending, but if it goes through as it has been proposed, it's going to wipe out not only the SAVE plan, but a lot of the other repayment plans that are currently available, which is a little scary for borrowers.
Yeah, where would that leave borrowers if all of those
Yeah.
plans are wiped out by that legislation?
Yeah, so I'll kind of talk broadly because I don't want to get too specific because I hate to talk specifics when it's a proposed, because there's like the House version and the Senate version, and they're similar but different. But the main takeaway I would say is that we could end up seeing two repayment plans. One is a standard plan. So typically the standard plan in the past was a 10-year plan, and that was like what you would get if you didn't switch your plan to something else. Now that they're looking at making the standard plan based on either 10 years or up to 25 years, depending on how much you've borrowed. So at different borrowing levels, you would have a certain standard plan. So that's fine. The other plan they're saying would be a new income-driven repayment plan that would wipe out the other plans. So it would get rid of ICR, not IBR, but ICR, Pay, and Save. It would be a new plan that would be based on 1 to 10% of income, which is interesting because it's not discretionary income like the previous plans were. So they're not taking any living allowance into account. It's just based on your income. So for those who are at the 10%, their payments will be higher than they were on a previous plan. But they all, instead of counting for a cost of living allowance, it might reduce the monthly payment by, I think it's $50 per dependent. So they do take it into account in some way. But it will, the way it's going to calculate is it might be lower for low income borrowers, but it's likely going to be higher for most borrowers. than what they've seen currently on the other income-driven plans. And it also will be or I should say will be, this is all proposed. It would be a 30-year term maximum instead of 20 or 25 years. So it'll be longer time in repayment. One benefit though is that similar to the SAVE plan, this plan would, for like low income borrowers who have really low payments that are not covering the interest that's accruing, it would wipe out the unpaid interest, similar to the SAVE plan. So they wouldn't see their balances growing the way they do on some of the, which is good.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask you whether you think this bill is going to pass and in what form, because this is not a political podcast. And I would imagine you have no idea whether it's going to pass and in what form. And I appreciate you doing the digging on some of these details with these two different versions. Are there other changes that you've seen that have been proposed within the reconciliation bill that can affect either current or future borrowers or past borrowers, I suppose?
Yeah. So the thing with past borrowers is that they will no longer, if this goes through as, as proposed, they would no longer see options under, extended, graduated. I talked about Save Pay or ICR. So they'd be limited to those two options, but they would maintain their option to use the income-based repayment plan. So folks that are on income-based repayment could stay on that, or prior borrowers could choose to use that plan. So that's one positive thing, because that was passed by Congress and they likely will keep that. Some other things, actually something huge that I want to make sure that future students' families are thinking about is that, and definitely keeping an eye on this, of course I can come back and talk about this when it's all final, but they're really looking at capping loan limits, which is good because for, I coach borrowers every day on repaying their loans, and it would be helpful to have less debt to repay your loans in the future, but it's going to limit options that students have as far as getting to school if they don't have the scholarships like you were talking about earlier. So they're looking at like eliminating the Grad Plus loans. So students that plan to do, enroll in expensive graduate programs will be limited. There's going to be other loan limits for their direct loans. And it's also looking to limit Parent Plus loans too. So it certainly will impact things going forward. And this would be for future borrowers after July of 2026. So we would
expect then that people who need to borrow in order to afford certain kinds of colleges or certain kinds of graduate programs won't be able to make those ends meet if that cap is in place, and we'll have to look elsewhere for education.
Yeah, not through the federal programs. They'd have to look at private loans, which, those have always been an option anyway. But I will say from my perspective, the borrowers that I see that are in the most trouble are the ones that have borrowed significant private loan debt, because once they become past due on that debt, that ruins their credit, and then they can't refinance to get a lower rate, and they have very limited repayment plan options under private loans. So that's a little.
Do those private loans tend to have higher interest rates as well from the starting point, or are they competitive with the federal loans?
It depends. It depends on the credit of, a lot of times for undergraduate borrowers, they're co-signers. So they could be comparable, but I've been speaking to a lot of borrowers recently who have over 10% in interest from their loans that they've taken in recent years.
Okay.
So they vary widely.
So do we have any sense for when we might get clarity on this? I mean, I didn't ask you if it was going to pass, but do you know when we'll know if some of this stuff will pass?
The original goal was July 4th. But now I was just reading earlier that the Senate version came out last week. That's not, they're hoping to vote on that. Now that piece should be finalized by July 4th. And then they have to negotiate, and hopefully before the August recess, it should, they're hoping to have it finalized by that point. So either way, we should know soon.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, I know you're reading this stuff, like you getting into the actual legislative details, Michelle?
Sadly, it's not my favorite thing, but I do it.
Amazing.
I do it for my colleagues.
We so appreciate it, and I know how tricky it can be, and how many pages of ideas are in there. So thank you so much for staying up on that and coming to share the details with our team and our listeners. Appreciate you.
Yeah, I mean, we want folks to be informed and making the best decisions for their
That's all we
families.
can do, right? That's all we can do. Well, thanks a lot for coming on the show today.
Absolutely.
All right, that does it for another episode of our College Coach Conversation here. We will be back again next week, just in advance of the 4th of July holiday. We'll talk about some of the best college traditions out there. We will answer your listener questions, and then it's a double segment of listener questions, some with admissions and some with finance. So get those questions into us. You can always send us an email or post onto our social media pages, and we are happy to respond to you. We're looking forward to a great conversation. Thanks a lot for joining us today, and best of luck as we move into July.